everybody gangsta till the skin starts walking. I'm Aiden Mattis, and welcome back to the Lore Lodge. If you've been on the paranormal side of the internet in the last 5 years or so, then you've probably seen quite a bit of content out there about skinwalkers. Since 2020, the mysterious beings have turned into one of the most popular subjects in horror and supernatural content, with countless videos claiming to show proof of their existence. Some show animals behaving oddly, such as dogs opening doors or gazing at their owners with unfamiliar stares. Alternatively, many show scenes of what appear to be human beings acting a little too much like animals, or with attributes like yellow eyes and gangly limbs. And then there are the most haunting sorts of videos, those taken by someone alone in the forest, only for a terrible scream to pierce through the air around them, sending them running. There's just one problem. None of those videos seem to be able to agree on exactly what a skinwalker is. Sure, there's plenty of people with explanations. One video with 13 million views, and from an entirely AI-generated account no less, proclaims to tell the true story of the skinwalkers, describing them as warlocks with the ability to shapeshift and become animals or people. The robotic narrator over on the Clock app goes on to say that they can not only take your appearance, but can also clone your voice perfectly. They apparently are also most common in Ohio and Arizona, though of course they can be found all over the world. Most frighteningly, however, the viewer is told that the preferred form of skinwalkers is that of your pet, and that skinwalkers will disguise themselves as lovable household animals only to strike when you least expect it. Even in the versions where skinwalkers are only present outside in the wild, their ability to mimic you or your loved ones in an effort to draw you into their clutches presents untold danger to those foolish enough to, fall into their clutches. And of course, you must never speak of them, or in particular say the word skinwalker, lest they find you and turn you into their next victim. So why is it that I have already said the word skinwalker 7 times? Well, on the one hand, I keep that thing on me. But more importantly, you may be surprised to learn that absolutely none of what I just described is accurate to the original lore of skinwalkers, which are a very real aspect of Native American folklore, and specifically of the Navajo people. In fact, most popular narratives about skinwalkers are so far from reality that they're more akin to internet horror stories and creepypastas, like the Rake or the Goatman or the Fleshgate, than anything traditional to the Navajo. For this video, I ended up spending a lot of time trying to track down the origin of the misconceptions about skinwalkers, and while the TV show Supernatural didn't get it right, and the Clock app is certainly to blame for the promulgation of less than factual material, quite a bit seems to stem from a particular episode of the TV show Ghost Adventures, hosted by Zach Baggins. But before we get into the origin of these misconceptions and then try to correct some of them, actually all of them, I need to tell you how you can keep yourself safe from skinwalkers, because they are witches and therefore have access to the internet. In case you're wondering what I mean, well, our partner for today's video, Delete Me, helps you to get your personal information off of listing sites and brokerages that could be used by skinwalkers or, stalkers, people who dislike you for your political beliefs, people who want to steal your identity, people who want to, stalk your friends and family. Basically, Delete Me goes and they get that information off the internet for you. It's very simple. The way it works is that you sign up for a subscription, you tell them the information that you don't want appearing on brokerage sites, and then a team of real qualified professionals go and find those sites that have your information and file takedown requests on your behalf. And like I said, this can help keep you safe from identity theft, stalking, anything that might involve somebody going and purchasing your information. And if you're wondering why it's a subscription service rather than just a one-time payment, or why you should hire Delete Me when you could just go do that yourself, the reason is that each time you file a takedown request, the information does come down, but if that company manages to get it again, if you submit a form, you sign up for a free trial, something like that, they can repost it. So every time it comes up, you have to request that it's taken down again. and Delete Me runs constant scans and constantly files those requests so that you don't have to. Basically what I'm telling you is that the low monthly fee is a very small price to pay to have peace of mind when you're on the internet, to know that your information isn't being spread around where you don't want it. So, if you'd like to give Delete Me a try and help keep your information safe from the stalkers, the talkers, and the skinwalkers, you can get 20% off Delete Me consumer plans when you go to joindeleteme.com/lorelodge and use promo code LORELODGE at checkout. Once again, that is joindeleteme.com/lorelodge and use code LORELODGE at checkout to get 20% off all Delete Me consumer plans. But thankfully, you don't need to worry about one person finding your information, and that's Zak Bagans, because he couldn't find it if there were an entire canyon named after it. Back in 2017, Travel Channel sent Zak Bagans and the Ghost Adventures crew out to a remote section of the New Mexico desert within the territory of the Navajo Nation. And by remote, I mean 5 miles from Farmington, which is a small city with a population of nearly 50,000 people. Early in the episode, Zak explains that they have received very special permission from the Navajo reservation to investigate Skinwalker Canyon. According to one of his companions, Billy, the Navajo never go there because it's like off limits. Zak quickly agrees, adding that they will not enter the canyon. And this is ostensibly because the canyon, which has several service roads running through it and is ringed on all sides by farmland and residential neighborhoods, is a place where the Navajo witches practice dark magic to call forth a shape-shifting being seldom spoke of outside of Navajo culture, the Skinwalker. Also, I want to take a quick moment to apologize for popularizing the term flesh pedestrian. That was my bad. And while I'm on the subject of terms that involve the word flesh, I'm pretty sure that flesh gate, as in the internet horror creepypasta thing, comes from skin walk, like flesh skin, walk gate. Not positive on that one, but we do have a video on that. But anyway, you might be wondering, what is a skinwalker according to Zak Bagans? Well, he never explicitly describes them, but there are a number of things he does say. For example, Zak tells one of his companions as they drive down a rural New Mexico highway that these roads are very well known for you drive at night, you see a coyote, then all of a sudden you're going 60 miles an hour, and the coyote is running with you. And then the coyote turns into a man, and the man has glowing yellow eyes. I gotta say, Zak Bagans has such a way with words. Now, where did he learn this, you might be asking? Nobody knows, because he didn't give a source, nor show an interview that confirmed this, or really do anything approaching proper explanation of how he came to this conclusion. In my opinion, he probably got it from a creepypasta, and a very well-known one at that, because nowhere in the actual scholarship could I find any discussion of such a phenomenon. In fact, everything I read from anthropologists like Clyde Kluckhohn refuted this as even being a possibility, but I'll get into that later. And if you're wondering why I'm citing Kluckhohn specifically, it's because he is the author of the book Navajo Witchcraft. This was written back in the 1930s and 40s, and it was using actual ethnographic studies where they went and spoke to around 100 Navajo informants who told them about sorcery and witchcraft and skinwalking and all of these things. So I find that to be a fairly authoritative document. If you'd like to read it for yourself, it is kind of expensive, but you can read it for free on Internet Archive. Just be aware that there's only one copy there, so you guys are going to have to take turns. Now, from what I can tell, Zak Bagans seems to think that skinwalkers are some sort of demonic entity, as he claims that, according to accounts, there was a Navajo man who was known on the reservation for summoning skinwalker entities through witchcraft, and that after his wife noticed that this created a darkness in him, she beheaded him with an axe. Now, he doesn't say where these accounts came from, when this might have happened, etc., but to be fair, the Navajo man he asked about the story did refuse to speak on it. Tom Wheeler, the owner of a trading post near Skinwalker Canyon, told him that most Navajo won't talk about skinwalkers, especially to outsiders, out of fear that something may happen to them. Thankfully, despite the fact that Zak tells the audience that speaking about skinwalkers is actually completely forbidden, he does manage to get several Navajo to talk about them, on camera, with their real legal names, for the Travel Channel. And among those willing to speak with the Ghost Adventures crew was Randy Yazzie, who met the guys at the barbed wire fence, which separates Skinwalker Canyon from the highway. Randy tells Zak that he doesn't venture into the canyon, which is actually named Ojo Amarillo Canyon, or Yellow Eye Canyon, for fear of unexplainable beings. And after explaining his own personal experiences seeing what he believed to be yellow-eyed skinwalkers in the canyon, Randy explains that there's two parts to it. The actual person that's doing the singing, and I'll get into that later, and the conjuring right here. This is what you see in the dark, the conjuring part. Zach then elaborates in a voiceover that the Navajo witch creates the Skinwalker entity through a sacrificial ritual where it has control over what acts of terror it does on the living. I do have to give Zach credit for asking the pertinent question of why this particular canyon, which Randy answers by explaining that there's a cave back there where the witches meet to conduct bad medicine. Where I become confused is the explanations given by Randy, because they stand in total and complete contradiction to all of the anecdotes, descriptions, and practices described by the Navajo people in academic works like Cluckhohn's Navajo Witchcraft. In the dozens upon dozens of stories accumulated by Cluckhohn and his colleagues, skinwalkers are never once described as conjurable entities distinct from the witches themselves. They are exclusively and explicitly described as witches using dark magic to transform themselves into animals, though with a degree of variation in precisely what that transformation involves and to what extent someone really becomes the animal. The yellow eyes aspect also threw me a bit, because many of the anecdotes clearly say that one way to tell a skinwalker from a real animal is by the fact that their eyes are slits, beneath which the eyes of the human witch can be seen, and none describe them as yellow-eyed. And this made me wonder if these individuals were giving their own opinions and stories, or if they were paid by Ghost Adventures to describe a version that lines up with the description that Zach and his producers wanted to present. I did feel a little bit more confident when they brought in their next guest, a young man named Vincent Lugin, who is described as a Navajo tracker. In a very entertaining moment, Zach nervously looks at Vincent, who is carrying a rifle, and asks, "What's the gun for?" And Vincent calmly explains that he brought the weapon because there may be a skinwalker out there. During the day, it's highly unlikely, but at night. And Zach then asks, if you see a skinwalker, you will shoot at it? And this question made me laugh, because what else would the rifle be for? And why would he expect that he wouldn't need protection from the demonic witchcraft entity? Zach just seems hilariously uncomfortable with the concept of a man carrying a rifle into a place that he's actively trying to convince his audience is filled with malevolent witches and their shape-shifting minions. Vincent handles the silly question pretty calmly, answering that if they keep their distance, then I won't fire, and that seems to put Zach's mind at ease long enough for him to realize that his machete might not be the best self-defense weapon. Vincent confirms this, telling him that it wouldn't be much use because if they're that close, usually they have other means of dealing with you. There's even belief that they can cause paralysis with their sight. Now, I don't necessarily doubt that Vincent is telling the truth here, but it is worth mentioning that nowhere in any scholarly work that I could find does an informant confirm this to be the case. In fact, they all pretty clearly say that skinwalkers, which are, again, one and the same as witches, use a form of poison to harm their victims. Though this poison, which is in a powdered form, is sometimes blown from furrowed sticks, so that could be where Vincent got the idea. In any case, they eventually make their way into the canyon and then park their Jeep Wranglers outside of the cave, where a spool of barbed wire sits ominously off to the side, almost as if it were placed there by a producer for dramatic effect. I think I was able to identify the exact section of canyon they were in, though I'm not positive, but even if I'm off by a little bit, it should be mentioned that there is quite literally no place in this canyon that is more than a mile from a road, and the entire thing is ringed by farms, a couple of neighborhoods, and a New Mexico State University property. And according to Cluckhohn's work, skinwalkers don't like to be anywhere near that close to civilization while they're doing their rituals, but again, we'll get into more detail about that in the next chapter. Anyway, once they arrive at the cave, Vincent points out that there appear to be fresh shoe prints inside, but none outside. They don't say anything about coyote prints, wolf prints, or anything else, and unfortunately none of them are shown. Then, a short ways deeper in, still close enough for natural light to illuminate the rock around them, one of the guys points out that a section of the wall seems to have an image of a phoenix painted or burned into it, and Zach wonders if this could have something to do with a skinwalker ritual. Now, it's debatable that the dark patch actually does look like a phoenix, and if Aiden is able to get a screenshot, then, well, editor Aiden, for those who don't know about the other Aiden who sits behind the camera, if he can get a screenshot, he will. If not, then, well, just listen to my words. But my point here is that Zach then elaborates that the phoenix obtains new life by arising from the ashes of its predecessor, changing from one state of being to another, much like the Skinwalker, which is raised through the ashes of a ritual and animal sacrifice, which is just not true at all. I mean, the Phoenix part, yeah, but that's not how Skinwalkers work, because again, they're not demonic entities, and animal sacrifice actually has nothing to do with it. The reality is much, much more disturbing, and while I'll be getting into that in the next chapter of this video as well, it should suffice to say that Travel Channel probably wouldn't have allowed a description of the actual rites and rituals involved to make the final cut of the episode. Anyway, after seeing the phoenix that doesn't really look like a phoenix, Zach sends Aaron and Vincent deeper into the cave, and the camera captures the moment when darkness swallows them. Moments later, Zach calls out, asking if they see any more tracks, but there is no response. And following their footsteps, he and the camera crew come to a natural archway, and Zach says that crossing under here could mean crossing into another dimension. In a voiceover, he explains that natural stone arches across the world are commonly believed to be doorways, crossing into other dimensional worlds, and that this would be the spot where we last saw Aaron and Vincent's flashlights, and they would have had to go under this arch. Could they have entered into another realm affecting time and space? Just gonna point out here that that's Celtic mythology, not Navajo. Regardless, the question is left unanswered and open, as Zach apparently found them an hour later, confused and trance-like, causing them to end their exploration of the cave. Now, he does not say where they were, how they found them, or anything of the sort. They just turned up, apparently. And according to the Native American-owned and operated ICT, or formerly Indian Country Today news network, this didn't sit well with members of the Navajo Nation, who blasted the episode after it came out for a number of reasons, including the fact that the references to a phoenix found in the cave and the arch as a gateway to evil are not from our culture. The same commenter was quoted as saying, "I wonder if the Navajo people in that episode knew what the producers were conjuring up. It was laughable and sad, an amateurish negative representation of Navajo culture." Yeah, that's right. You can erase the paragraph you were writing about me speaking over the Navajo. I use this platform for good, and occasionally a dash of evil. It should also be said that the criticism from the Navajo Nation was not limited to the events in the cave, and another major point of contention came with the next scene of the episode, in which Zach explained that as night fell, a medicine woman approached us out of nowhere. According to the show, her name was Walking Thunder, and she told them they needed to undergo a Navajo warrior ceremony because she felt they were already in danger from entering the cave, and the ceremony will prepare us for the canyon at night. Now, I can't claim to be an expert on Navajo rituals, but this one did not look particularly authentic. She painted what she called warrior paint on their faces, chanted, and gave them an herb that she referred to as the Ghostbuster, which supposedly would fortify them against something that is very distinctly not a ghost, according to the interviews conducted by Clarkone and others. But as a video of the ritual plays, Zach explains that becoming honorary warriors of the Navajo Nation is a responsibility bestowed upon us that we will not take lightly. And with that, it's not hard to understand why this episode outraged a large portion of the Navajo community. One Navajo citizen who honors traditional teachings and declined to be named complained to ICT that it was shameful that the Navajo Nation permitted such misinformed, exploitative depictions of Diné culture without providing some cultural guidance. In addition, Navajo actor Lauren Anthony told ICT's magazine, ICMN, that "no one that I know is called Walking Thunder on our res." Though, to be fair, he also said that he gave the Ghost Adventures episode a 10 out of 10 for shaking my head, and enjoyed every over-exaggerated minute of it. And looking back on it, I almost have to wonder if the Navajo individuals involved in this episode were playing one big prank on the guys, not only because nobody corrected their deeply mistaken beliefs about what skinwalkers are, but also because the herb that Walking Thunder gave them appears to have been sacred datura, which is a highly hallucinogenic plant that can cause people to trip for hours or even days, depending on the dosage, and trip they did. Just before it kicked in, however, Zach had the wherewithal to ask what happens if they show fear to a skinwalker, and Walking Thunder gave them the utterly hilarious reply, "That's it," which is just about the worst thing to say to somebody who is about to start hallucinating in a Skinwalker Canyon. And she didn't really make it any better when, after being asked to clarify, she told him that you're either gonna die or you're gonna pass out. And in another downright comedic moment, during the process of showing that the lads are tripping balls, the camera scans by the side of the road they didn't show earlier in the episode while at the entrance to the canyon, displaying that they are literally 1,000 feet from a neighborhood. Like they were barely on the other side of the fence from the highway. Anyway, once they've calmed down, about 4 hours later, they proceed back to the cave, and as they climb the hillside, Zach points out that Aaron is carrying several animal pelts given to them by a Navajo man, which are allegedly meant to attract skinwalkers. Once again, not anywhere in the anecdotes recorded by Cluckhone and his associates. Astonishingly, Zach and his crew then find a fire with an animal head skull, it must be identified from like an animal foot skull, I suppose, at the entrance of the Witchcraft Cave in Skinwalker Canyon. They also find a feather and thoroughly freak out about it, as well as a .45 caliber casing inside of the cave, close to a perfectly circular hole they say looks like a bullet hole. It simply does not look like a bullet hole. And here they say they fear that a Navajo witch came here last night, like after they were there for their exploration of the cave, to put a curse on us by sacrificing an animal to summon a skinwalker, which he believes emerges from a separate dimension through the natural archway they found earlier. They also find 3 fresh ashen marks on a wall, which they say are definitely demonic in nature, and I will point out yet again that sacrificing an animal is not part of any ritual regarding skinwalkers, aside from killing one for its skin, and that skinwalkers are not summoned because skinwalkers are witches, not demonic entities summoned by witches. Despite their fears, they do make the decision to split up, leaving Aaron behind in the cave, while Jay sits by the entrance with a speaker playing what appears to be generic Native American-style drumming. And Aaron then asks the witch, which of course is a human, not a ghost. There are so many problems with this show. Anyway, he asks the witch if the drumming bothers it, and asks the skinwalker to come in and talk to him, after which he records an EVP. Allegedly. After that, he says the energy just got so scary, and I think it's important to remember that it's very possible he was still tripping during this entire experience. Then there's an audible scream, which to me sounds like a coyote, and to Aaron's credit, he does recognize that it sounds like a bobcat, though he elaborates that it's more like a witch mixed with a bobcat, whatever that means. Then he starts doing his native warrior grunt, taught to him by the illustrious Walking Thunder, but it doesn't seem to raise his spirits much. If you're wondering what this looked like, he's sitting in the cave in the dark on night vision just going, hoo, hoo, a bunch of times. So thoroughly spooked, Aaron leaves the cave to go get Jay, and then they go back inside to try and communicate with the spirit world using a mirror. Never mind that skinwalkers aren't part of the spirit world, because they're not spirits, because they're literally human beings practicing witchcraft. If you thought it couldn't get worse, you'd be wrong, because Jay then says that part of one of the ceremonies of the skinwalker is to scry into a mirror, and actually morph their own face into, before stopping to point at a flash of light that is very obviously a flashlight or a camera flash inside of the cave. And for those unaware, scrying is a form of divination, which involves the use of a reflective or refractive object to channel visions from the spirit realm. And honestly, I don't even know where he came up with the idea that this is part of the Skinwalker ritual. The Navajo didn't even have mirrors until Europeans introduced them, and not one of the informants recorded in Cluckhone's work, or any of the others by other researchers that I could find, mentioned mirrors or even divination. As for that flash of light, Zach's voiceover asks if it's possible that it is a charge of energy caused by a skinwalker entering or leaving our dimension. And I don't think I need to explain myself again. I think you guys get the point. In any case, Aaron decides to try using an EMF reader with a thermometer while Jay is scrying, and Jay says he's getting chills, which is maybe because it's 51.3 degrees according to the reader, which then starts displaying a drop in temperature, even though skinwalkers don't have any association with temperature because they're not ghosts. Aaron then freaks out about something touching his shoulder while Jay holds up what appears to be a claw of some kind, after which the meter jumps into the high 80s, which they both say can't be right. And considering that neither of them said anything about feeling warm, I'm thinking it probably wasn't. Seems like they just had a faulty temperature reader, or maybe Aaron put his hand on the sensor. But as all of that is happening inside the cave, Zach and Billy are out in the canyon looking for any sign of a skinwalker. At one point, they both notice the smell of something dead, and the show presents a flashback to Walking Thunder claiming that when the skinwalker comes near, they'll smell death. They decide that this is a good place to set up a camera, but only identify their position as an unknown location in Skinwalker Canyon. Now, it is a 3.5-mile canyon, which is surrounded by roads, farms, and residential neighborhoods. Please, Zach, please. Anyway, Zach spots a pair of yellow eyes out in the darkness of Yellow Eyes Canyon, and while he acknowledges that this could easily be explained by an animal, he elaborates that since they're out in Skinwalker Canyon, which again isn't even actually called Skinwalker Canyon, it could be a shape-shifting skinwalker. The eyes suddenly disappear. The whole thing is edited, so it probably wasn't all that sudden, but the eyes disappear, and then they hear a screech from above them, and at this moment, they realize they no longer smell death before jumping at a shadow. Like literally, Zach says he saw a really tall shadow standing behind Billy. Now, Zach has the acting chops of a 5,500-year-old non-breeding salmon, so it's not really particularly convincing. Then there is, of course, another screech, and it does not occur to Zach or Billy that it could be, a screech owl, which are common in New Mexico. Like the western screech owl is endemic there. And shortly after this, Zach says that he and Billy are about 3 miles deep into Skinwalker Canyon, which sounds dirty but isn't, and that's an impressive feat considering that the canyon is only about 3 miles long, and he also says that they are out of cell service, out of walkie-talkie range, and with no sign of civilization in sight. But in reality, they were less than a mile from the road on either side, and the distance from the canyon floor to the canyon rim at that point is only about 80 feet at a 10% grade. They could have walked out and found civilization in under 20 minutes. But they wouldn't need to, because they were driving a car made by arguably the world's most popular off-road vehicle brand. Anyway, after hearing another unexplained growl, Zach says that he feels his life is in danger, but instead of having the typical panic and fear, he just feels frozen, which is a fear response. As they're saying this, they capture a light anomaly floating down the mountain, which really looks like it's just a piece of reflective material floating in the wind. Meanwhile, Aaron and Jay were off trying to find them, and they did. The episode then just unceremoniously ends without any real conclusion or even a climax. They didn't even capture footage of a skinwalker, didn't really understand what a skinwalker was, and presented only what one writer to ICT referred to as a staged fire with an animal skull, feather, and a bullet, and bizarre explanations from white men who came to get the story that fits their series. I do want to give Zach and the guys the benefit of the doubt and just laugh at them for being stupid, but I also think it's important to correct the misconceptions their episode seems to have placed into the minds of so many people interested in horror and paranormal content. I don't know if Zach Baggins and his crew intended to create something exploitative, or if they just don't have a clue what they're doing, but I do sort of believe that the Navajo involved in the production were deliberately screwing with this man, because not one of them bothered to correct him about the whole witch summoning a skinwalker thing. And, like I said, I'm not sure that Travel Channel would have approved the episode if anyone had, because the real lore of the skinwalker is much more disturbing than anything Zach Baggins could conjure up himself. In actual Navajo folklore, skinwalkers are witches, but they're not so much a type of witch as they are a kind of form taken by witches. So it would not be incorrect to say that all skinwalkers are witches and all witches are skinwalkers. A skinwalker is simply a witch in animal form, and the process of becoming an animal is learned as part of becoming a witch. In that sense, the proper question is not, what is a skinwalker, but rather, what is a witch? And in the words of the late anthropologist Clyde Kluckhohn, according to Navajo belief, there are a number of distinct methods of carrying out malevolent activity. Each has its own Navajo name, and these terms are almost never used interchangeably. The problem is that these terms don't translate very well to English, or any Indo-European language for that matter, and thus Kluckhohn undertook to assign them English language counterparts. And while there are a good number of these terms and classifications, there are really only 3 that are most relevant to the topic of skinwalkers, and Kluckhohn breaks them down into 3 very recognizable terms, those being witchery, sorcery, and wizardry. That said, it's important to understand that these words don't carry the same meanings they do in English, and the most important of these, at least for the purposes of this video, is the first one, which covers both the practices of skinwalkers as well as the overall category into which they fall. You see, skinwalkers aren't exactly a classification unto themselves. Instead, skinwalking, for lack of a better term, is something that witches do as part of witching. But what is witching, you might ask? The answer is a bit more complicated than you might think. Witches are associated with death and the dead, Kluckhohn wrote. They are likewise closely associated with incest. Suspicion of incest means, by that very fact, suspicion of witch activity, and vice versa. And as you can see, we are off to a great start. I forgot to write this into the script, but it did occur to me. In Navajo culture, incest is seen as something that is a sign of pure insanity, or, like I said, of being a witch. It's either, you have to either be insane or evil. It's kind of like cannibalism in Algonquian culture. Moving swiftly along, similar to witches in the European sense of the term, practitioners can be both male and female, though in Navajo storytelling they are more commonly men. And Kluckhohn did also say that, and I'm using his words here, transvestites are no more or less likely to be witches. Again, book was written in 1944. Actually, realistically, the book was written in 1967, but it was just realistically, actually, the book was published in 1967, but it's an accumulation of letters written between like 1936 and 1944. That's right, folks. At the same time that the Navajos were code talking, Kluckhohn was learning about skinwalking. That was supposed to be a legitimate, like, respectful shout out to the Navajo code talkers who very much helped us win World War II. Like, they were essential to the war in the Pacific. Getting back on script, however, in Kluckhohn's experience as a researcher, he found that almost all the female witches mentioned in actual anecdotes were old women, and some informants insisted that only childless women could be witches. At least as far as women went, like women with children couldn't be witches. As for the motivation, it was always something negative, like vengeance, greed, or pure malice, often motivated by envy. For this reason, the targets of a witch were often those perceived to be wealthier or of higher status than the witch himself, as well as that person's friends and family. And one of the key differences between witches in the European tradition and those in the Navajo tradition comes into play here with the actual method of witchcraft. In the European tradition, witch has become sort of a stand-in for malevolent magic user, incorporating the concepts of enchanters, sorcerers, and diviners into one catch-all term. European witches use potions, hexes, and all sorts of other means, but Kluckhohn's use of the term in a Navajo context is far more narrow. The classic witchery way technique, he wrote, is that mentioned in the Emergence legend. And I wanted to go into that legend in more detail, but oh boy is it complicated and full of terminology that I don't yet fully understand. What I can tell you right now is that skinwalkers do have an association with the figure of Coyote, and that the figure of Coyote, their sort of trickster deity being, he needs to be on a list. This man is a predator in more than one way. He's also not really a man. He's more of a coyote guy. Like I said, not super clear on the details yet. I'm gonna look into that. Thankfully, Kluckhohn wrote in a way that doesn't require familiarity with the legend in order to understand the topic of witchcraft, which he says typically involves a preparation, usually called a poison by English-speaking informants, made of the flesh of corpses. Now, remember how I said it's far more disturbing than Zach Baggins made it out to be? Buckle up, because not only is the use of corpse flesh the premier method of crafting the poison, but the flesh of children, and especially of twin children, is preferred, and the bones at the back of the head and skin whorls are the prized ingredients. Once a witch obtained the necessary substances, they would dry them and grind them into a powder, which, once applied, would cause fainting, lockjaw, a tongue black and swollen, immediate loss of consciousness, or some similar dramatic symptom, against which traditional remedies were ineffective. Once the target passed away, the witch would wait until a night when the grave was unattended, steal out under the cover of darkness, and rob the site of both the deceased and their belongings. The intended use of the poison was not always to kill, however, and one very interesting aspect of the lore deals with the community aspect of witchcraft. While witches were not open about their dark practices with their neighbors and family and the tribe as a whole, that didn't mean that they performed them in isolation, because witches frequently served the community as singers, a term that I understand to refer to something that might be more familiar to most Americans as medicine men. So these singers, the good singers, would act as healers, and when you had a witch who was one of these singers, they would work with other witches to exploit that trust. In some cases, Cluckhone found that one witch would make a person seriously ill, and his partner, a healer, would treat him, and the two would split the fees. In others, the witch, who was a singer, would cause illness, and then the diagnostician, which was a position distinct from that of a singer, would recommend treatment by the same singer, or witch. The most difficult part of either method, of course, was the application of the poison. It wasn't quite as big an issue if the intention was a rapid death, or if a skinwalker met somebody out in the wild, but either way, the witch had to get to the victim without being seen or identified. And this is where the issue of skinwalkers comes into play, because contrary to popular belief that skinwalkers use their shape-shifting abilities for violence, the primary reasons that they take the form of animals are to disguise their appearance and make rapid transit over long distances. In their human form, witches had no special supernatural abilities, and would also leave very identifiable human-shaped tracks anywhere they went. In the form of an animal, however, they could traverse many miles at greater speed, and leave behind only the tracks of whatever animal they were impersonating, which was most commonly a coyote. Depending on the informant, the exact manner of impersonation varies, but there was a general agreement that a skinwalker would be wearing the skin of a dead animal. One anecdote described how witches take the bones out and leave the claws, put sticks in the legs to move the skin, and with strings they move the ears of the hide up and down. One way that a skinwalker could be distinguished from a real animal was by how they moved, because the ears would always move up and down, and the tail would hang limp and listless. Once in animal form, the skinwalker will approach the home of their target, traditionally a log and packed mud dwelling known as a hogan. In one anecdote recorded by Cluckhone, the witch then climbs atop the dwelling and drops their poison powder through the smoke hole, causing illness to befall whoever is inside. And others suggest that the witch climbs inside and applies the powder to whoever their intended target is before escaping back the way they came. But none describe any physical attack by skinwalkers while in their disguised state. This method was not foolproof, however, because sometimes skinwalkers would be found out the morning after the incident. Dirt falling through a smoke hole, dogs that are unusually upset, or any number of other occurrences might indicate that a witch had come, and the family would attempt to track the culprit by the tracks left behind. According to Cluckhone, the tracks of the skinwalkers are usually spoken of as larger than those of the actual animals, and would sometimes be followed for a long distance only to end at the home of some other Navajo, sometimes a stranger, but other times a clan member or sibling. In these cases, the witch was usually found out and would try to buy their freedom with beads or other jewelry, but this would almost always be denied by the trackers. On other occasions, skinwalkers would be caught in the act as they retreated from their victim's home, or just as they were out and about skinwalking. Because they wore the skins of predatory animals, and in some anecdotes, because the person recognized that he was looking at a skinwalker, they would be shot. But oftentimes this would not be fatal in the moment. So in the case that one was shot in skinwalker form by somebody who thought they were just shooting at a coyote, something would often happen where a person would turn up with an injury and a questionable story, and then suspicion would fall upon them. There were also a number of other stories recorded where people were out in the wild and they saw a coyote or a wolf or a bear and realized that it was a skinwalker in some form or another, and then the skinwalker will plead for its life, and then the person will shoot it anyway. And then there were also a couple of other ones where the skinwalker happened to be a clan member or a sibling, and so they let it live, but they still tell everybody. So it's not the kind of thing where like every single time it's the same result. But when a skinwalker was caught, be it in the act or through tracking, or their identity is just revealed, there's only one punishment, and that is death. This would already be appropriate because of the murder and grave robbing aspect, but these alone were not the only sins being punished. I know I said things were going to get darker than Ghost Adventures could ever have imagined, but to this point I don't think I've really explained how bad it gets. You see, becoming a witch was not as simple as learning a few spells and understanding the ingredients in a poison. In order to gain the supernatural abilities granted by witchery, there was an initiation process which involved breaking just about every taboo held in Navajo society, and this was performed during an event known as the Witches' Sabbath. And it's what went on at these clandestine meetings far out in the wilderness that truly condemned witches to their fate. Zach Baggins did get at least a few things right, and one of them was that these rituals typically happened in caves. Witches would gather, strip off all of their clothes, put on a mask, and sit in a circle surrounded by baskets of corpse flesh taken from the graves of their victims. In some anecdotes provided by Navajo informants, it was said that human heads lined the walls of these caves, watching the ceremonies with dead eyes. Clothed only in their painted masks and beaded jewelry, they would perform dark rituals, partake in cannibalism, commit acts of incest, and, according to some anecdotes, engage in necrophilia. And, of course, in order to join the ranks of the witches, an initiate had to kill a close relative, usually a friend or sibling, and bring their body back to the witch's sabbath to be used as part of the rituals and consumed by those gathered. One of the most disturbing anecdotes I found in Cluckhorn's book involved the attempted initiation of an unsuspecting teenage boy who was either caught or kidnapped by two witch people one night. In the story, which I've adapted here from the original language, keeping the spirit of it but making it flow a little bit better, just because it clearly was communicated through imperfect English. Anyway, they told him that they were taking him to a sing, or a ceremony, and thus he went along thinking it was being held by one of the good singers, one of the healers, one of the medicine men. So these witches take him far away, farther than any sing he'd ever been to, until eventually they came to a place where there was some kind of door in the ground. One of his captors blew a whistle, the same kind of whistle that the singer uses, and slowly the door crept open. They then descended into the cave, where the other witches expected that their comrades were returning with a body. But when they saw the boy, one of the witches asked, "Why did you bring this boy over? He's got no business to come in here." The boy then stands off to the side as his captors speak with the others, and as he waits, a whistle comes from outside once again. A witch opens the door, and two more come through, this time carrying the body of a dead woman. And they carried it into another chamber of the cave. Then the boy peers in, sees that it's full of dried corpse flesh, and begins to understand his predicament. But before he can even think to escape, he hears the sound of the door closing over top of the exit once again. Soon after, he's approached by a man that he recognizes, and this man tells him not to worry, and that they want him to join in their ways and rituals. So this witch takes him around the cave, showing him the bounty of meat, the endless stores of turquoise and beads, and the skins they use to transform into beasts of the night. They told this boy they were going to teach him how to use the wolf's skin, the informant said, but first he'd have to undress and put it on. Afraid of upsetting the witches, he complies, and they bring him into the room where they have stashed the woman's body. Then they tell him the first step of his initiation, which I think I can just let you figure out yourselves by telling you he wasn't asked to eat it. And I want to be clear here that the teenage boy is, as most people in the Navajo community would be, utterly horrified at this request. So he thinks quickly and asks that he be let out of the cave to relieve himself before going any further into the ritual. At first, the witches deny him, but he insists, ultimately telling him that if they don't let him go, he's gonna have to do it in the cave. And finally, they agree to allow him a few minutes outside. A couple of the witches accompany him, but they turn their backs as he pretends to relieve himself, and once they're not looking, he sprints away as fast as he can. The witches give chase, but in their human forms, they're too slow to catch him, but still, he knows that he can't outrun them all forever, especially once they do their transformation, so he hides inside of a dead pine tree until he hears them go by. Then, once he's sure they're gone, he climbs out and makes his way home to tell the story. As for what happened after all that, all we're told is that Tall Smith from Thoreau was in that bunch of witches, and that he got killed in a car accident just a few years ago. Horrifying as the story is, there is something legitimately hilarious about a skinwalker being killed in something as mundane as a car accident. I do think it's worth noting that one of the great misconceptions about skinwalkers, at least according to popular media, is that they're like Native American werewolves, and as such can only be killed by things like silver or white ash-laced bullets. So far as I can tell, they're just as vulnerable to normal weapons as any man, even in their animal form. And one anecdote even advises that they should be shot in the neck of the coyote or wolf when disguised, as shooting the head would just be shooting the dead animal. The witch's head, on the other hand, would sit in the neck of the pelt, and thus a shot placed there would kill him or her immediately. So what do we make of all that? One thing is for certain, the popular narrative about skinwalkers is about as far from reality as you can get. They're not demons from another dimension. They're not some inhuman monsters living off in the wilderness. And they're definitely not the desert Wendigo. Instead, they are a manifestation of what the Navajo believe to be the worst of humanity, a living, breathing, skinwalking taboo that stands in defiance of all things good and just. And while I couldn't get into it in this episode for lack of research time, there are some interesting similarities to the Northern Dene Wet'suwet'en, and certainly a connection to the figure of Coyote in the Navajo emergence story. One thing that I do have quite a few questions about, and that I hope to investigate sometime in the near future, is when the Skinwalker came to be in the history of the Navajo people. It's clearly distinct from the Wet'suwet'en and other similar Dene concepts of the Great White North, but at the same time, it seems like there must be some sort of connection. Both involve the breaking of taboos, both involve cannibalism, and both involve isolation from society, but is this a result of divergent traditions, or are they just distinct manifestations of cultural anxieties which developed after the Navajo marched south? And of course, I do not mean to suggest that there are no such thing as skinwalkers and that Navajo witches aren't a thing. Like, that clearly witchcraft is a thing in Navajo culture, and it's a bad thing in Navajo culture, and it is something that's practiced. But that's one of the things is, why do skinwalkers seem so unique to the Navajo and not the related Apache? Because the Apache were part of the same migration. So why is it that the idea of shape-shifting witches seems to be absent from the mythology of the latter? They both have witches, and the witches both use powdered poison, but I couldn't find shape-shifting in the Apache stories, just the Navajo. A gap in scholarship could be to blame for the lack of information, or I wonder if there's something more complicated at play. If you guys are interested in a video exploring the differences and similarities between these concepts as they pertain to the southern, northern, and Pacific Coast Dene communities, and as well the differences between the Navajo and the Apache, let me know in the comments so I can try to make that happen. And if you would like to support us making it happen, then you can subscribe on Patreon for $1 a month. We are working on getting more and more exclusive content up there, and I believe that soon we're going to be posting ad-free episodes. I'm looking at Thornberry right now. He's nodding his head. So yeah, we're going to be posting ad-free episodes on Patreon. So if you hate ads, it's worth the $1 a month. And it's also actually worth the $1 a month for us too, because we make way more money on that dollar than we do on you watching an ad. Now, of course, if you want to be like a skinwalker and feel as though you're wearing our skin, you can do that by going to Bunker Branding. We have several designs over there in both t-shirt and hoodie form, and they are extraordinarily cozy. If you're less interested in wearing the lodge and would prefer to drink the lodge and absorb our essence through your stomach, then you can do that by going to tableauroastingco.com and purchasing Mount Pocono Perk, our signature coffee blend that I designed myself. And if you're just looking for more Lodge, you can get that by checking out The Weird Bible, History Unhinged, or my personal channel, Aiden Mattis. We also do have a live show that airs Monday nights at 7 p.m. right on this channel, and while you should have your notifications on, just saying, but you might have noticed that YouTube doesn't really notify you when something goes live. It notifies you when it thinks you're going to watch it. So the best way to get timely notifications is to join our Discord at bit.ly/jointhelodge or via the link in the description of this video. And because this is kind of the first time that we've done a direct breakdown of the misconceptions of a topic, outside of Missing 411, and we just love doing that, it's fun. If you would like more breakdowns like this of the true lore behind something as opposed to the way it's presented in media, please give me suggestions in the comments. I will take a look through them, and I had a great time doing this, so especially if there's like a Ghost Adventure style episode on it somewhere that I can use, please let me know and I will make it happen. With all of that said, I'm Aiden Mattis, and thank you for stopping by the Lore Lodge.